may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
All right, guys. I am very excited to bring y'all this video. Now, the last in-depth research video that we did with the tight ends a few days ago, I mean, it absolutely smashed. And I will say that I know that research videos for fantasy football aren't necessarily popular on YouTube for a couple reasons. At least these are what I hypothesize. A, that you're finding fantasy football YouTubers not necessarily knowing exactly what to look for, not necessarily knowing exactly how to do the research. And they go, hey, you know what? It's very easy to come on and just say, this player is going to be a league winner for these 3 reasons. So let's make an entire video based around that because it's going to be easier. It's going to take less time. And also you find that those videos get way more views. I mean, people are way more likely to click on a video that says, draft these running backs. These wide receivers are sleepers. And then all of a sudden that video pops off, has 10,000 views because it's a very simple concept that everybody understands. So I'm hoping that people are kind of starving at this point for these in-depth research videos. That way we can go through and we can have a more complex strategy going into this upcoming season and really have a great discussion circulating about what actually matters in fantasy drafts. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people just don't care about these. So please go down to the comment section. Let me know if you want me to stick with the typical sleeper videos, the typical league winner videos, and we could just do that. Or let me know if you like this research. Let me know if you think that this is a little more useful for y'all, because I'll tell you, it takes me way more work on my end. It's a lot harder for me. It would be way easier for me to come out and do the same thing everyone else is doing, where they just make a sleeper video every single day and act like nothing else has changed. But yeah, outside of that, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and a quick update for the Fantasy Flock Meetup. We are having the Flock Meetup June 19th, 6 p.m. at Zilker Park in Austin, Texas. Now, please just be on the lookout for me. I'm going to be the devilish, handsome blonde dude with a great looking big ass white dog. So please, if you want to meet me, this is going to be the only shot, because we are going to be moving to Florida if you're living in Texas. So make sure you come out to that. And yeah, let's dive into this video. Now, the hypothesis that we're looking at here is very simple. Y'all know that I've been talking about for pretty much the past 12 months that raw touches at the running back position are overvalued, and that you need to be focusing on 2 things, and you need to be trying to identify the players that can give you the combination of both categories. And if you can find that, not only are they going to be at a massive discount in fantasy, but at the same time, they provide such a high floor and ceiling combination that these are the real league winners. These are the guys that you should be going for. So of course, we're going to actually be talking about those players at the end, but more so I want to present the research. And y'all know I've been talking about trying to identify running backs that are going to be getting rushes at the goal line as well as usage in the passing game. So here, this is really going to draw a line where on one side of the fence, you're going to be finding the player like a J.D. McKissick, a Naheem Hines. I mean, someone that's going to be at the very top of the NFL and what they are doing with their targets on a yearly basis. But at the same time, you're never really interested in fantasy. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the reasoning behind that? Are we not interested in a Naheem Hines? Are we not interested in a J.D. McKissick? Because the raw number of touches aren't going to be there, with them not necessarily getting that many carries between the tackles, or are they missing out on one of the most important categories in fantasy football, and that is touches at the goal line? And on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, I mean, when you're trying to identify a running back that is getting that goal line usage, but maybe they don't necessarily have that same receiving upside, where you go through and you see a guy like Adrian Peterson, you see a guy like Melvin Gordon, possibly a Josh Jacobs, who's been disappointing in fantasy over the past few years. And you go, what is missing here? I mean, this running back is getting touches inside the 10, yet at the same time, they're not really on the radar. They're not really providing an elite ceiling in fantasy because they don't have that usage at the receiving game. But anyway, let's dive into this. And what I want to do is I want to try to prove this hypothesis that what you need in a running back is not just raw touches, but what you need is you just need to make sure that they are checking the boxes on both getting rushes and usage at the goal line, as well as getting used in the receiving game. So how we did this is we went through and we tracked the top 24 running backs in rushes that they received inside the 10-yard line this past year. Now, for full transparency in this video, and if anybody wants to improve on this research and help me out here, this is going to be massive. But the one fault that we have in this research is going to be that our rushes inside the top 10-yard line, we could not find data on that on a per game basis. We had to use season totals, and when you use season totals, it's not going to be fair for the running backs that only played 10 games, like a guy like Austin Eckler. I mean, they're going to be falling out slightly in terms of the targets we are looking at. There you can find per game totals, but no, with the touches inside the 10-yard line, that was not available to us. This is still going to be very useful data, especially when we are trying to apply this to 2021, but it's not going to be perfect, and that is a little bit more skewed to the players that played the entire season. But anyway, let's go through and let's look at the top 24 running backs in touches inside the 10-yard line. Now, we're not going to focus in on player by player. I more so just want to get the list out there. Maybe I'll throw a screenshot up here with the little notes app that we have pulled up. But anyway, Dalvin Cook, Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs, Henry, Zeke, Kamara, Taylor, Gurley, Monty, Davis, Chubb, Gaskin, Henderson, Akers, Rojo, Aaron Jones, Benny Snell, Adrian Peterson, Melvin Gordon, Antonio Gibson, Kareem Hunt, DeAndre Swift, Gus Edwards, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, that was in order, and also, maybe I remember to put the screenshot up. You'll see their running back finish in points per game with Christian McCaffrey taken out, given the fact that Christian McCaffrey didn't play the full slate that you wanted to see. And you're going to find here that there is a correlation, a strong correlation, from getting those touches inside the 10-yard line and finishing high in fantasy. Now, of course, not every running back is going to be like that. Obviously, a guy like Benny Snell, a guy like Adrian Peterson, a guy like Gus Edwards, I mean, even if they are getting the touches inside the 10, I mean, when they're not going to have that receiving usage, they're not going to be on your fantasy radar, which is, of course, why we're making this video. We are trying to figure out the actual impact that you have on both categories. But anyway, if you look at this raw data set and you look at how many of the guys were top 5 finishers from this list, you have 4. 4 of the top 5 finishers finished top 24 in touches inside the 10-yard line. Now, this should be surprising for nobody. Now, the only guy that actually missed this mark was James Robinson. And here with Robinson, it's not even like this is a player that didn't have the goal line role. I mean, he had the goal line role. If they ever got there, he was getting the ball. The problem was he was playing on one of the worst, if not the worst, offense in the entire NFL. So James Robinson missing that top 5 mark, but 80% of the running backs inside the top 5 were top 24 in touches inside the 10-yard line. Now, if you go through, and the next set we are going to be looking at is top 12 running backs. So out of the top 12 running backs, you actually had 8 of them finishing in the top 24 in touches inside the 10-yard line, which is good for 67%. Now, top 24 guys, you actually have 18 of the top 24 running backs on a per game basis finished as the top 24 in touches inside the 10-yard line. Some of the guys that missed this mark, like we already discussed, were guys like Gus Edwards. You had Adrian Peterson, Benny Snell, Darrell Henderson. I mean, guys that didn't have the usage in the receiving game. Someone who got an insane amount of touchdowns this past year, but was highly ineffective in Todd Gurley. I mean, he sticks out here like a sore thumb. So that is going to account for 75%. So essentially, if you have that goal line role, I mean, more times than not, you're going to be a very productive player in fantasy. And that's what you're kind of searching for here. But you can't just have that goal line role, because you're always going to have the Gus Edwards. You're always going to have the Todd Gurley, the guy that's getting those touches, but they're still useless in fantasy. So what you need to do is you need to go through and you need to look at the other valuable touches in the offense. Then at the end of the video, we can go through and cross-reference and come up a list with what had both running backs on it. But anyway, let's look at running backs and the targets that they got on a per game basis. So this is going to be a fantastic list that we have pulled up here. And in order, we're going to go very fast through this. You have Kamara, McKissick, Eckler, Hines, Zeke, Davis, Gaskin, Montgomery, Aaron Jones, James White, Swift, Robinson, Sanders, Edmonds, CEH, Dalvin Cook, Carson, David Johnson, Giovanni Bernard, Leonard Fournette, Kalen Ballage, James Conner, and Rex Burkhead. So obviously on this list, you have a ton of guys that you weren't starting in fantasy. I mean, you go through a guy like Rex Burkhead was never touching your lineup. Kalen Ballage on some weeks, but not most. James White, same thing here. J.D. McKissick, Naheem Hines. I mean, players that were really boom and bust, and it's because they weren't getting the other valuable touches in their offense. I mean, we go through and we look at what you actually had in terms of the raw data. 4 out of the 5 top 5 finishers from this past year were top 24 at the running back position in targets per game. The only guy that was not top 24 was Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry missed this category, but Derrick Henry is a freak outlier. We understand that. We have seen that for years now. Now, top 12, you actually have 9 out of the 12 top finishers at the running back position finishing top 24 in targets on a per game basis. I mean, another player that didn't hit this mark, and another reason why I'm not necessarily that high on him, and I don't think he has top 5 upside given the usage in his offense, is a guy like Nick Chubb. Now, Nick Chubb, one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. We talk about this all the time, but the problem is when you're missing out on one of the most valuable form of touches across all positions and receptions, I mean, you are missing out on so much with what you're finding with your fantasy season. So here, you actually have 75% of those guys, which is a great hit rate. Now, once you go down a little bit more, I mean, you're going to have a lot of guys missing from the top 24. So out of the top 24 running backs in points per game, only 14 of them were top 24 in targets per game. So that's a little over half. That's at 58%. But let's not focus in too much on that because we always know that you can identify a running back that's going to have a goal line role. You can always identify a running back that's going to have a pure receiving role. And they're going to be cheap in fantasy because they don't have what it takes to have access to that elite upside. But what I want to focus in on is the running backs that actually were top 24 in both categories. So this is going to be a low bar. I will say that. You just have to be a top 24 running back in the targets per game, and you also have to be a top 24 running back in the raw touches inside the 10-yard line. Now, the list here is going to be very short, but it's going to be full of league-winning players and also those studs at the very top. So you have Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery. Now here come the cheap league winners in both Mike Davis and Myles Gaskin. Then you have Aaron Jones, DeAndre Swift, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now we go through, we look at the data set with this. I mean, every single one of these running backs finished in the top 24 in points per game this past season. Every single guy. Now you raise the bar up, and out of these players, you had 6 out of 9 of them actually finishing as running back ones on a per game basis this season. That 67% of these running backs finished as running back ones. And then top 5 guys, you had 3 out of 9 of them. So you had a 33% chance. If you could identify a running back that was going to be top 24 in both categories, there's a 33% chance that they are a top 5 running back in fantasy. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying, Mason, this study is a little bit flawed. I mean, obviously a running back getting just raw touches is going to hit the great mark on both of these categories. Are you sure we shouldn't just be focusing in on the touches per game rather than these 2 specific roles that you're going to find in an NFL offense? And so, of course, we had to do some research on this. We had to go through and see if that take is actually correct, and maybe raw touches are the only thing that matters. But no, you go through, and what I wanted to do here is I wanted to look at the average touches per game that you had from each one of these running backs that were in this top 9 list. And I want to see if they stand out from league average, if there was something that pushed them over the edge compared to the other guys. And here, Dalvin Cook, 25, Zeke, 19, Kamara, 16, Montgomery, 20, Davis, 14, Gaskin, 18, Aaron Jones, 17, Swift, 12, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 13. So I know those touches really don't mean a lot for you. So let me try to put this with some context. Let me try to go through and show exactly why it's actually way more important to make sure you're targeting the running backs that you know are going to have both of those roles on their offenses rather than just a raw number of touches. So what I want to do is I want to draw a line from what you're finding with the raw touches per game and then see the success rate of that running back actually clearing the mark and seeing if there's a discrepancy between the actual running back finish and where they were in touches per game. So if we look at this list, the 5th running back in all of the NFL this year in touches per game was James Robinson at 20.6. Now, if we go through this entire list that we have accumulated, there were only 2 running backs out of this entire list that actually beat that mark in both David Montgomery and Dalvin Cook. So you already find that this list is performing better than what you're finding with their expectation of just their raw touches and finishing as a top 5 guy. Now you go through, do the same thing for that 12 mark, and here that 12 mark is going to be 17.6, and you find that 5 out of the 9 of these players actually meet that threshold, which we don't really care about too much because you see there's a better hit rate with them actually finishing as a top 12 running back. And what's even better is you go through and do the same thing with the 24th running back mark. So just to make sure you are a top 24 guy. And Mike Davis barely clears this. So you almost have only 6 out of 9 of these players finishing as a top 24 running back in touches per game. Yet every single one of them on this list actually meets that mark where they are top 24 in points per game. So this shows that identifying running backs that are going to be top 24 in the 2 important categories is way more predictive and way more important for predicting fantasy finishes at the running back position and compared to raw touches. So the results of this study, at least what I'm coming away with it, is don't be overrating the raw number of touches that a running back is going to get in an offense. You need to try to identify the running backs that are going to have a role in the passing game, and you also need to make sure that those guys are going to be getting usage at the goal line. So we go through, and there are some obvious players at the very top of every fantasy draft that you're going to find this mark with. I mean, the perfect examples of this, because you've seen these running backs do it season after season after season, are going to be Alvin Kamara and Aaron Jones. Now, obviously, I don't need to come out here and I don't need to tell you why Alvin Kamara and Aaron Jones are good picks in fantasy. We actually learned this lesson with Aaron Jones a few years ago. That's how we came to this conclusion. That's how we had the thought process to do this research, was because of Aaron Jones. But now we need to do a job of trying to identify what running backs can fit this mold next. We need to try to identify the running backs that are going to be going a little later in fantasy drafts, because they're not going to be getting every touch in their backfield, because they're not going to be Ezekiel Elliott. They're not going to be Dalvin Cook, which of course, if you can identify those guys and you can go draft them, then do so. Those players are always going to be the most valuable players in fantasy. But no, who are the players you possibly can get at a slight discount because people are focusing in on the wrong details? And my 2 nominations for this category are going to be DeAndre Swift and Travis Etienne. Both running backs that you have a significant amount of team investment into from their NFL franchises, both running backs that are elite pass catching options, and we know that they have the respective BMIs where they can earn a goal line role. Now, we have seen this before with DeAndre Swift. We saw this in his rookie season. He actually already made the top 24 list in both categories, and I expect him to build on what he did last year. But in the case of Travis Etienne, this is a running back that you are getting a massive discount on because people are worried about James Robinson. People are worried that James Robinson is going to be getting 12 carries a game in this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Well, I'm not worried about that at all. The only thing I'd be worried about with James Robinson is if he gets the goal line usage. But we have seen time and time again that NFL teams are way more willing to force feed touches at the goal line, force feed those touchdowns to the running backs that they want to succeed, the running backs that they want to prove that they made the correct investment into. So I think you're going to find that Urban Meyer, when they're first and goal at the 3-yard line, instead of having James Robinson in there, I'd imagine that he goes, hey, we got to convince the Jacksonville Jaguars, their front office, as well as their fan base, that we made the correct decision by drafting Travis Etienne. So let's make sure Travis Etienne is in our goal line package. And at that point, I mean, you're looking at James Robinson pretty much soaking up every touch that holds no value in that offense. I don't want that. I want Travis Etienne. I want the guy that is going to be highly valued in his receiving game, as well as what you're finding at the goal line. So yeah, the 2 guys that are going to be my nominations on this going forward, obviously Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, we already know about, but DeAndre Swift falling to the late 3rd in some redraft leagues right now, and Travis Etienne, where you can get him sometimes in the 5th round of redraft leagues. Take the discount with these players. I mean, they are both easily candidates to be top 24 in each category, and we see what that means for their chances of hitting at a top 5 season, a top 12, and a top 24, and at that point, they are great bets. But yeah, thank you, my dudes. And I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, if y'all did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. I want to thank everybody who has recently decided to join the flock in Alex, Jack, Bud, Kevin, Connor, Caesar, Jonathan, Joseph, Jordan, and James. Thank you, my dudes.